Nearly 20,000 secondary school teachers walked off the job today after what the Teachers' Union has called an appalling pay offer from the government.
6,000 senior doctors and dentists have walked off the job in a 48-hour strike that began at midnight.
When I say Simeon, you say shame! Simeon! Shame! Simeon!
The New Zealand Professional Firefighters Union has announced all firefighters will walk off the job for 1 hour in mid-October over pay.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, a nation on pause. New Zealand has been hit by another wave of industrial strikes this year as workers fight back against pay freezes and staffing shortages. Hospitals have fallen silent, classrooms have sat empty, blood tests and tax queries have been delayed as thousands of New Zealanders, from nurses and teachers to Uber drivers and lab technicians, have walked off the job.
Health Minister Simeon Brown has criticised the strike action, which Health New Zealand says will affect thousands of patients.
It says about 1,800 elective procedures, 3,600 first specialist appointments, 7,000 follow-up appointments and 800 outpatient procedures will be postponed.
Government ministers have gone on the offensive, saying that after just 6 days of bargaining, the union's actions are disproportionate. Judith Collins saying what the teachers are doing is an attack on students.
Regardless, more strike action and protests are planned for tomorrow and next week. The latter will be huge.
More than 11,500 allied health workers, including physiotherapists, social workers and health assistants, will strike for 24 hours on October 23rd. 40,000 primary school teachers, principals and support staff have already announced that they will strike on that day too.
The Prime Minister says New Zealanders are sick of unions going on strike. Almost 100,000 members across education and health have voted to stop work on October 23. Chris Luxon says he just wants the unions to get back around the table and negotiate.
Because it's putting our kids who have missed out on a lot of school off school. We've got a lot of students about to go into exam mode. We've got also a lot of patients, frankly, that are also wanting to get through the wait lists and into surgeries as well.
So today, to get an insight into why so many Kiwis are striking, what it will mean for the nation, and also the country's history of taking to the picket line, I chat to political journalist Anna White and Victoria University Associate Professor in Law Grant Morris. Anna, who has covered the strikes extensively for The Post, says in the last 9 months more than 18,000 employees have gone on strike, with nearly 17,000 person days of work lost and an estimated $4.6 million lost in wages. That's happened over 22 official work stoppages, according to IMBI, which provided those figures. But Anna says they may not include everything and everyone.
22 is actually, in the scheme of things, not as high as previous years, but you see things like things that have impacted us, the teacher strikes, the nurses strikes, and there has been public service strikes as well this year.
It feels like, forgive me if I'm wrong, it just feels like we're in a constant state of striking, so it surprises me that it's only 22.
I think what the difference is here, though, is that the strike action is more larger unions. So sometimes you see, smaller strikes going on, but it is those big impacting ones that kind of do change your everyday. I don't know if, people who have children or people who are using the healthcare system probably feel it a little bit more. The same as if they know that there are people within those industries. If your partner's a teacher or, your mum might work at a hospital, that's when it kind of feels like there is continual strikes.
It's all the time. Anna, what's driving this wave of strikes this year?
I don't know if this is a fair comment, but I think it's possibly fair. Politicians like to think it's more about them. So, for example, more right-wing governments tend to think that unions sort of act out a bit more against them. Labour or left-wing governments seem to think that unions think that they can get a bit more out of them. But really, what it seems in a more recent years to come down to is your own personal circumstance, cost of living, inflation, just really seeing those increased prices at the supermarket is like a continual one. And that was the same back in the sort of 2022, early 2023 wave of strike action. That was the underlying cause there. I mean, it's the same thing going on, it seems, but just different governments.
How big are these strikes and sort of how many people are taking part? And I guess the flow on from that is what impact is this having on their workplaces?
That's actually really good at flowing on from that last question, actually. One of the differences here, though, from the 2022, 2023 strikes versus now is this big strike action that is looming on October 23. Now, there are a few things that unions or unionised members need to be able to participate in strikes. You need to be bargaining at that time and for a period of time, so you can't just be like, oh yeah, I want to strike. There has to be a few boxes ticked. But what we're looking at in October 23, and this is just seems like how the stars have aligned for the unions, is that there could be more than 100,000 workers participating in industrial action on the same day, and that is a really high number for New Zealand in recent times.
That's huge. It feels unprecedented. How's the sort of government responded? Are they angry? What are they saying?
We've been talking about this for quite some time in terms of the nurses and health workers and education strikes. Their points are this is disrupting for patients. I actually asked Simeon Brown just before about this, and he said they're using patients as pawns, whereas for education they've sort of given it into the hands of the Public Service Commissioner, Sir Brian Roche. That's been quite a tense negotiating environment as well. I mean, there's never going to be any good outcomes when the government and the unions are at loggerheads. I've talked to previous ministers from the last government saying that they had sleepless nights when they knew that there was this really tense bargaining environment. It just does feel that the environment at the time is a huge contributor to what's going on at the moment.
I mean, we are in a cost of living crisis. Realistically, is the government ever going to match what the protesters want? And, if they can't, is this just going to be endless until at least the next election?
I wish I could look into the magic wall and tell you. But I guess one thing for this is there has been sort of that narrative of striking against, or at least, telling the government what they think here. So that could be part of this mega strike action. On what happens next, it's going to be really interesting. We're heading towards December. I mean, people don't really want to be striking over Christmas. I guess it depends. Let's see what happens on October 23. What's the energy levels like there? Some of these unions have been striking or have been engaged in industrial action or at least bargaining for quite some time. People get fatigued, so I mean maybe that's what the government's kind of hoping for.
Because I want to know about that. Have you seen at all a shift in sort of public sentiment? Are Kiwis generally sort of supporting these strikes, or are they growing frustrated with the ongoing disruption?
When it comes to the healthcare workers, I think they had quite a bit of publicity previously around some of the workforce issues. That's probably played a lot into their favour. There does come a point, though, I think, with education. I mean, it is getting into exam time.
A point not lost on Education Minister Erica Stanford this week.
I think it's deeply unfair for students who are about to sit the final exams that they have been getting ready for years and who need those teachers in their classrooms for that last minute revision. This is disrupting not only that last bit of time they've got with their teacher, but also a lot of their mock exams that they'll get their derived grades from.
Teachers won't be ignoring that. That will be something playing on the mind of a lot of education professionals. Yeah, it all has to do with the environment, doesn't it? And whatever the offer comes after this, I mean, there are options. They can go into more formal situations with the Employment Relations Authority. It'll be just definitely one to watch here.
1, 2, 3, 4. Teachers walking out the door. 5, 6, 7, 8. We just want to educate.
Teachers are on strike today because the government are not coming to the table. The reason we're here is we've been at the negotiation table now for 6 days with the government. They're giving us a 1% pay rise and they haven't met us on any of our other conditions.
Hard to believe now, but New Zealand used to be known as the land without strikes, and we were the pin-up country for industrial relations. Law professor Grant Morris says this dates back to the 1890s, when trade unions started flexing their muscles.
The government's thinking, what can we do to make this work? What can we do to regulate this area between employers and employees and in particular unions? And what we get is this very, very important piece of legislation, the Industrial Conciliation and Arbitration Act 1894, which is world-leading, groundbreaking, and sets the scene for the coming decades. And basically what it sets up is a system of arbitration, the idea being that workers and employers will come into the system and instead of striking, they will, if they have a dispute and they can't work it out themselves or through conciliation or something like that, they'll submit it to an arbitration court and the arbitration court will make a binding decision and the parties will accept it. And so New Zealand became known for at least, up until just before World War I, as the land without strikes. And people from overseas and other jurisdictions would come and visit New Zealand to see what we had done and how it was working.
What on earth changed?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because for a while there, we were kind of the case study in perhaps how to do things with industrial relations. And then some of the big unions, this is particularly just before the First World War, some of the big unions were getting frustrated with this arbitration system. They thought, well, maybe we could get more if we, went on strike, if we opted out of this system and we got that power to strike and really flexed our muscles rather than kind of relying on this arbitration court, which might be, they might have perceived it as being more, open to the employer's perspective than theirs. And so what happens is in 1912 and 1913 in particular, some of these unions basically say, right, we're going outside the system, we're going to strike. And the two very famous ones are the Waihi miners' strike of 1912, where unfortunately, someone was killed in the chaos, the only person to die in industrial action, in a strike action in New Zealand history. And then the 1913 waterfront strike. Now, it was actually wider than just the wharfies in Wellington, but it's remembered for the waterfront workers in Wellington going on strike, and then William Massey sending in Massey's Cossacks on horseback to basically break the strike up.
To sort them out.
Yeah.
At that point, did we just get a taste for it and think, this is what we want to do, this is going to get better results, we're going to become a nation of strikers and protesters?
Yeah, not that simple, because what happens is it kind of goes through different phases depending on the economics and depending on a range of factors. So, and we've still got, of course, the system that goes on, this arbitration system. So that's still kind of supposed to be at the heart of things. And when we get to the Depression, of course, it's you've got to be very careful about taking industrial action when huge amounts of the population are unemployed. And workers are very careful, so that dampens it down. And then after World War II, the unions start thinking, or at least some of the unions start thinking, we're time to flex our muscles again. And you get the big 1951 strike, the most famous or infamous strike in New Zealand's history.
That strike lasted 151 days, and at its peak, 22,000 wharfies were involved.
The government declared a state of emergency. Police could arrest without warrant, prohibit meetings. They had unrestricted power of entry. Trial by jury was jettisoned, and under the regulations you were guilty until proven innocent. It was illegal to picket, to distribute leaflets, to report the workers' side of the dispute, against the law to give food to the families of strikers. Peaceful demonstrators were battened and bludgeoned to try and make them toe the government line.
How does the sort of scale and tone of, say, today's strikes compare to, say, that mass resistance of the 1951 lockout or the sort of militant unionism of the 1970s?
Yeah, and the 1970s is a really good one. It's not one that we necessarily talk about as much as the ones at 1951 and 1913. But 1979, 300,000 workers go on strike in New Zealand's only real proper general national strike. And now it's important to note that this could happen in 1979 because one group of workers has an issue and others can sympathy strike. That there's no longer the ability to sympathy strike under the Employment Relations Act 2000. And if we look at it today, I mean, what are we looking at for next week? They reckon they're going to get over 100,000, don't they?
That's huge for New Zealand.
Oh, yeah, it is. Now, if we take those, so 1951, 1913, and we do the equation with population difference, you're looking, obviously much smaller population back then. You're looking at similar scale in terms of numbers. Obviously, it's not going to be like the 1979 one, but then again, that was under different legal conditions. So this is going to be big. There's no doubt about it. It's also reflective of the fact that the unions who are in that process of collective bargaining breaking down and therefore able to strike are big unions. They're the big ones.
Yeah.
And so they've got the numbers. So it makes the numbers, I think, look, how could I phrase it? It makes the numbers look particularly big because the unions going on strike are the particularly big ones.
The strikes that we're having, Grant, what usually triggers them? Is it economic hardship or is it sort of more by frustration over fairness and, say, recognition?
It's a really good question because, as I try and teach anyway in my negotiation classes at Victoria Law School, what are the underlying interests here? It's more than just give us more money. And it is about, I think, recognition, about status, about knowing that you're valued through your working conditions, through the way you're paid. And let's face it, a lot of it's about cost of living. And if you're getting, and this goes for so many different industries and professions in New Zealand at the moment, if you've been getting less than inflation over the last, 4 or 5 years, you're going backwards.
Yeah.
And that particularly for people on tight budgets, who plan, this is our budget, we don't have much room, cumulatively over years, because that gets baked in, right? It is really, really difficult. People have to take on extra jobs. They have to think, cut costs, because, I think there's a basic expectation amongst workers that pay will go up at least as high as inflation. That's kind of an expectation. Now, of course, that doesn't always happen and hasn't been happening, but I think there's something intuitive with workers that expects, surely you wouldn't let us go backwards, kind of, I think that's a big thing that's playing out here.
He says protesters and strikers don't discriminate when it comes to governments. They will take to the picket line under red and blue.
Maybe the tone might change a bit, though, because of course, Labour is a creature I don't know if he maybe is to some extent, of the unions. It arose from the union movement, of course, and unions still play a key role within the party. So, in a way, when they take industrial action against a Labour-led government, they're kind of saying to their friends and allies, come on, give us a hand here, give us, we're expecting more. And when we do strike or take industrial action, we are kind of expecting that you will fulfill what we believe we deserve from you. So I think there's and perhaps they can expect more as well. Labour, you would expect, would be more empathetic towards what the unions and their demands, perhaps. Also, you'd expect that Labour might be a little bit worried about the votes.
Yes, it's their people.
Yeah. They could say, well, okay, they're never going to go national anyway. But I think you've got to be a bit careful with that, because these people, let's be honest here, many of the people striking next week are going to be centre-left voters. I think that's a given the professions and the history of those particular professions and unions. So National's probably not going to lose many votes from those particular people, but it may well lose votes from the people that are affected, like parents and hospital patients. And I imagine that's the equation that particularly worries a National-led government.
How do you think National and the coalition government has handled the strikes this year?
I mean, my personal view is that both sides are engaging in textbook competitive positional negotiation here, which is unfortunate from someone who teaches interest-based negotiation. And the Act itself was set up to encourage interest-based negotiation, not this kind of really confrontational, played out through media, played out through strikes, or kind of somewhat insulting offers from the employer. That's not how it's ideally supposed to be. But, this is where we are.
This is where we're landed now. We've got an election next year, obviously. Can we expect, Grant, another wave of strikes, ahead of Election Day, which I suspect will be this time next year?
Yeah. So I think the answer is yes, but remembering that under the Act, there are particular conditions that need to be met before a union can strike. But I think there is, unfortunately, a fairly high chance that the parties aren't going to be able to come to any agreement over the next few months, and therefore, it's going to keep going until, someone blinks.
We wait with bated breath. From a historical standpoint, where does this year, 2025, sit on the spectrum of industrial unrest? Is it sort of a minor blip or a defining era?
I think it's somewhere in between. It definitely doesn't have the super intense, almost destructive nature of 1913 or 1951, where society was being divided. I don't think it's having that effect. But on the other hand, the scale of it, and partly because it just happens that so many of the big unions happen to be in collective bargaining at the same time, and it's falling apart at the same time, that the size of it is going to be something we haven't seen for some time, especially next week when we're getting multiple unions going out on the same day. So I think that will have some historical impact.
Do you think we're getting a little bit of protest strike fatigue as a nation, because there seem to be so many with so varied protests that are going on?
Yeah, so this will be what the government's counting on and what the unions are worried about. You do get moments like 1951 where the support for a union taking long drawn out industrial action starts to fade away. The public basically starts to say, come on. This has gone on long enough. And instead of the government looking like the bad guy, the government starts to look, well, perhaps, the union needs to pull its head in a bit or compromise a bit. So I don't think we're at that point yet. I think the unions can be pretty confident that a lot of New Zealanders are behind them at this point of time. But if it goes on too long, and if their demands are considered too high, a lot of New Zealanders will be saying, well, I'm not getting X pay rise. I've had to kind of accept that. Why don't you? It is. It will. It's almost certainly will happen at some point. It's just when.
That's almost it for today. Thank you to Grant Morris, who I should add has gone on strike before.
Yes, I have.
Wow, when was
this?
Yes,
I have. This would have been, was it 2022? Yeah, so this was when the Tertiary Education Union was in collective bargaining with the university.
Did you get what you wanted?
No. No, not even close.
Oh, bugger. Thank you to Anna White. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and Davina Zimmer and engineered by Jeremy Veal. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.